All right, welcome to class 5. We're talking about the basics of lookup functions. We're looking a little bit at date and time functions and some text functions. We're going to start with date and time. We're going to show you a couple of things like entering today's date, entering right now, entering a date difference, getting the difference between 2 days based on what granularity you want to look at there, and then also how to format dates in the specific way that you want. So in the table down here, we've got an admission and a discharge for each patient. And the very first thing that we've done is we have measured the difference between the admission and discharge by doing a date difference. You saw before that we were doing a just simple subtraction of 2 dates, but here's a little more direct way to say what it is you want to measure and at what granularity. So an example of what I mean by granularity is you can see in the equation for date difference that it takes 3 different arguments. It takes date number 1, date number 2, and then essentially at what grain. And so this is saying give me the date difference between these two at the day grain. D here represents day. And so you see I've got 34 days for the first admission, 3 days, and 1 day. If I were to change that grain or granularity to month, then I'm going to see how many months are there between these 2 dates. Oh, sorry, I don't know why I entered the number 1. I meant to put an M for month. And so between the first set, there's 1 month between those, and the others, there's less than 1 month. So it actually comes down to 0. So it gives you some flexibility and a chance to directly say what kind of date difference you want to measure. So that's a more mature way to be doing a date difference in Excel. Let's look at today. I'm recording this on the 18th, January 18th, 2025. And so when I enter the equation equals today, open and close parentheses, I get today's date. That's how that one works. Pretty straightforward. Now let's look at another example of using date difference. I've got the date difference between today and the discharge date at the granularity of date. I think because I've got this set into the future, it's not giving me an answer. So let's put this back at January 5th of 25. And now there's a legitimate difference between today and discharge, and it's 13 days. So that would continue down and do the same thing for each of these. What is the difference between today and this discharge date? And finally, let's look at a way to format our dates a little bit better. This text function will allow you to format any sort of text. And so I'm going to format the today column over here in F, and I'm going to do it in this format. Now, how did I know this format is going to give me this output to the right? I didn't. I had to look it up. It's really confusing and difficult to figure out exactly what to put there. And so guess what? You got to look it up. I can't give you every single thing, and I don't remember all this stuff. So it's always on Google somewhere or YouTube. All right, let's go on to the next item. We've done date and time functions. We're going to move on and look at some different text functions. This becomes handy in Excel when you're working with things like IDs. In healthcare, unfortunately, sometimes the medical record numbers or the primary ID we use to point to a patient has letters and numbers. Now, that can be really tough in looking at that information and joining on it directly and using it. So there are times when the medical record number, even though it has letters and numbers, we just want to keep the numbers. So this is actually a very common use case for me to use these sorts of text function. So I'm going to use the first function that you see here, even though the first and second operate in a very similar, just opposite way. This is the function called left. And so what it's going to do is take the content from cell C15 and give me the left 5 most characters, because I've put a 5 here. If I were to put 7, you're going to see that it will grab everything that's in that column, you know, the 7 characters that go on these IDs all the way out through the value that is there on the not just the numbers but also the letter. Here the point was I wanted to transform this patient ID and just grab the first 5 of them. Right works just in the opposite way. It would take the right X most characters that you specify. So those are commonly used. Another one that comes up as a need for me often is the need to concatenate. And so concat is the function, C-O-N-C-A-T. It takes number of arguments, as many as you'd like to give it, to connect and put together everything that you give it into a text string. And so here I've said I want to put together patient, then I want to put together a space and an open parentheses, then I want the patient ID, and then I want to close that parentheses. And so here in column E, you can see a nicely formatted patient name with their patient ID. So this would be an example of where I might have to use concatenate to just format text, make it look a little bit nicer. The last one I'll show you that comes in handy, especially as you're trying to do the left and the right, sometimes you need to know, in order to get how many characters to return, some part of that decision is how long is the set of characters. It also could be useful in the example I'm going to set up here where we're looking for any bad data. So let's presume that this patient ID is supposed to be 7 characters long, as all of these seem to be, where they've got 5 numbers, a dash, and then a letter. And so if I use the len formula, I just say what is the equals len of that patient ID. We see 777, and here we have an issue. This one is 8. And so I kind of planted this. I have an extra space in this ID. It was just bad data. So that's another type of need you might have for this len formula. All right, now you've seen some functions to use with text, and let's move on to some logical functions. So logical functions are trying to make a decision or perform some sort of logic against your data. The first one that we're going to do is a really simple if function. This is if a condition is true, return something. If it isn't, return something else. So the way that the function works is you tell it what is the condition you want met. So this condition that I'm going to put forward is I want to know if this cost column is greater than $2,000. If it is, I want you to return yes. And if it isn't, I want you to return no. And so you'll see for the items where cost is under $2,000, you get a no, and the item where it's above $2,000, you get a yes. So that's the most basic type of logical function that operates in Excel. All right, so let's look at 2 others, and an or logic. These are going to return a true or a false. Note, you could use them in the if function, but these will on their own just return a true or a false for the condition that you put into them. So I've got equals and in there I've got 2 different conditions. So I am saying I want to know when cost is greater than $1,000, and then you'll see a comma. So that means that the first criteria is just that, and what comes next is the next criteria. So the next criteria I've got is if insurance coverage equals yes. So what this is accomplishing is checking each of my records here to say, I want to know if this record had a cost greater than $1,000 and they had insurance coverage. So that's true for our first record and false for the next 2 because of the information that you can see over here. One is over 1,000 but has no insurance coverage. One is under 1,000. Even though they do have insurance coverage, it returns as false. All right, next we're going to look at some OR logic. This is going to accomplish something a little bit different. This is going to check to see, as you can tell from the formula here, I'm just going to change this a little because it reads easier when I use the table references instead of the cell references. And so let me just swap that out so that you can see what I was trying to accomplish here. All right, so now the new equation reads or, so then the first criteria is that insurance coverage equals yes, and then there's a comma, which means that's the first whole criteria, and what comes after is the next criteria, and you can add as many or conditions as you'd like. But here I've got 2. The first is insurance coverage yes, and the second is cost under $500. So this will return true if one of these 2 things is true. Their insurance coverage is yes, or their cost is under $500. So in this top instance, their insurance coverage is yes. Even though their cost is not under $500, we return true because it's an OR logic. And also in that final cell, we've got a cost that is under $500. Turns out the insurance logic also yes. That's why we get a true. So those are some examples of using logical functions within Excel. All right, now we're going to go on to a pretty big cornerstone in the use of Excel for data analysis. That is lookup functions. Lookup functions become really important to gather data from some other location, some other table, some other source. And I've referenced them before, and now we're going to look a little more closely at what it is that they do and how we accomplish it. So the two we're going to show today are the VLOOKUP and the XLOOKUP. And so what we're going to do is look up in the table below, which is some patient insurance status information. What is this patient in this table's insurance status? And so what is in my equation here? The my function. The VLOOKUP function takes 4 arguments. The first argument is a lookup value. So what I am looking up is this patient ID on this row. I want to look this up, and the next item I enter into the function is where I want to look it up, the table array. And you can see down here in red, just like is listed for the table array is red, this is the place where I'm looking it up. I'm looking for the patient ID in this range, and it's only going to look up in the very far left column. That is one thing about VLOOKUPs that is a little bit limiting, but it is kind of the OG, the traditional way everybody did lookups in Excel. So people have gotten used to it and probably overuse it, to be honest. The next item is the column index number. The column index number is which column do you want me to return if I find the thing you told me to look up. So I've told you to look up this patient ID, and when you find it, if I were to say return column 1, it would just give me the patient ID. If I said return column 2, it will give me what is here in insurance status. If I had highlighted a wider range, I could choose a number greater, and I would just return the number of the column in that range that I had highlighted. Then the final choice is it says range lookup. I don't think that's a very good descriptor. It is essentially a true-false choice whether or not you want to do a lookup that is an exact match. That is what you choose false for. Or you want to do what would be thought of or called like a fuzzy match. So it doesn't have to match exactly, but it's close enough. The kind of concern there is that you're not sure how it's making that close enough decision. And so it might be thinking very loosely, well, this has got 3 of the same numbers and not all 5. Let's just say, yes, this is a match. And so in my career, I've never chosen true for this entry. So you can dive in and look at when that might be applicable. I have not found that to be the case yet. When you enter false, it's also the default. I believe if you don't enter it, it's going to do this. It will be looking for exact matches. And so when I put that in, we get a return for the first 3 patients because I've got those 3 patients here in my other table. And so the last item, or the last patient, Jim James, is not down here, and so it can't return anything to us. That's how this function is working. If it finds a match, it will return what is in the table. So let's just show one other example, because a common exception people ask about is what happens if there are 2 pieces of information. So I'm going to put this patient ID 12345 in twice, one that says covered and one that says not covered. Now when you look above at patient ID 12345, the VLOOKUP still says covered. The default action of this VLOOKUP is to return the first match that it finds. And so that's what's going to happen here in this range. That is why, even though there's 2 records for patient ID 12345, one is covered, one is not covered, the first one it found is covered, so that's what it's going to return. So that's a quick little caveat to know about how this is working. All right, the way that VLOOKUPs have progressed, they've proven to be a really useful item, and so they've continued to build out other types of lookup functions. The XLOOKUP is a lot more flexible type of lookup function, and so I would highly recommend that you get comfortable with how it works and how you might use it, because it's a lot more flexible and helps you to do what you need to do without being stuck with some of the limitations of that VLOOKUP. Some of the ways that it operates, the fact that it has to be looking at the first column, some of those things. So it takes a lookup value just like the VLOOKUP, and so I'm telling this function to look up the patient ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then it's going to ask, where should I look that up? So that's where I actually don't pick this entire range. I just pick the place where patient ID is. And so I tell it to look up that value in patient ID. Then it asks, what do you want to return? And so I can say, once you find patient ID, return the value that has the same kind of like index or position as it, but from this column over here, insurance status. So this is helpful if I were to have some information that was spread out across the table, it was in a different order, and I didn't have the patient ID maybe at the front. I can be really explicit to say, look for patient ID, and then give me the record in this other area. So that is why this becomes really powerful. Now you also choose a match mode. There's sort of a default there. The next thing that's actually chosen is the what to do if it's not found. And so I've decided just to go ahead and present text that says not found. After that, they do have a match mode. That is the, do you want an exact match or not? There's also some optionality for a search mode. I'm not familiar with that. I haven't used it. This would be a great place to go look for really good videos on just X lookups. I'm sure you can find all the detail you need. I just want to get you introduced to it, understand the concept. This is how I would use it the most. I use the default match mode and search mode. I'm just saying, look for this item. If you don't find it, return not found. And so you see that each of the top 3, I get the information that's available in the insurance coverage table below. But for the last item, instead of getting an error, I get not found. So this becomes really handy. All right, that is video 5. Thanks for joining me. I can't wait to see you for the next video.